Okay, let's talk about some of the pros and cons of moving to the Tampa, Florida area. I'm Sam, and thanks for coming by the Living in Tampa channel, where we make videos about what it's like to live, move, and invest in Tampa. If that's something you want to follow along with, don't forget to subscribe down below. Also, we are a team of realtors, so if you have real estate specific questions or needs, we would love to help you. We would love to hear from you. Phone number and email are right there and in the description down below. I heard someone use the phrase the Florida delusion the other day, talking about people that moved down here during the pandemic and whether or not they are happy with it, whether if they regret it, and just kind of this general consensus that happened during the pandemic where it seemed like everybody was moving to Florida. And as I've said before, Florida influx, Tampa influx is not new. It's not just a pandemic thing, but I talked to a lot of you that wanted to move here during the pandemic. So I am pretty familiar with the reasons why. Of course, Florida is a pretty free state. That was a big reason during the pandemic. I was actually talking to someone from Toronto just the other day, and it seems like every time like that province in Canada would have new like shelter in place orders, I would get a flood of calls from the Toronto area. So that was a big reason during the pandemic, but people still move here, even after that. Some of the areas that get talked about that had the highest influx were Northport, Cape Coral, Miami, Lakeland, Ocala, like the Villages area, and not all of those are equal. Miami is a big city, 5 million people. Cape Coral is like 150,000 people, and it's part of a bigger metro area that doesn't even have an international airport. So I want to talk about some of the pros and cons of all of this today. And it was very common during the pandemic. The pandemic had people searching for a different quality of life. And maybe you are among that group, or maybe it just put that seed in your mind and you still are looking for that. Maybe you're looking in Florida or Texas or Tennessee or Puerto Rico or France, I don't know. But you may be still looking for that. Let's jump right into the cons. Con number one of moving to Tampa, moving to Florida, is you're not alone. And you're still not alone. There's always going to be people moving to the area, and that brings with it certain dynamics. I mean, it brings with it people coming from expensive markets into a cheaper market here, having more cash to put down as a down payment or pay cash for a property. Also, a lot of people have vacation homes. So you're often not just competing against homeowners, you're competing against vacation homeowners or real estate investors. And I mean, during the pandemic, real estate investors were paying a lot, these specifically institutional real estate investors, but typically a real estate investor is looking for a deal. So you're not always competing against them directly. Number two con, I want to talk about these smaller towns that were really popular, Northport and Cape Coral. I grew up in a town of 9,000, so these towns aren't super small, but they are part of the Bradenton, Sarasota, Port Charlotte kind of metropolitan area when you look at like the MSA down there, which is not a very big one. It's really not, like there's not a big airport, there's not a big city, there's not a big industry, there's not professional sports teams. It doesn't feel like a big city, and a lot of people moving there, they wanted that kind of feeling, that kind of removal from that. But if you're moving here in a different phase of life, you might want to be close to an airport, or close to a bigger airport, or close to you know, ships to be able to go on cruises. Like, people move to Florida for all kinds of reasons, and ending up in a town like that, you might feel a little bit isolated. Okay, the third con of moving to Florida, especially right now, we just had Hurricane Ian hit.
It's been 11 days since Hurricane Ian, a Category 4 monster of a storm, cut across central Florida. Even in a state that's no stranger to hurricanes, the destruction in the wake of Ian is staggering. More than 100 deaths, most by drowning.
Mostly impacted that like south of Sarasota down to Naples area. But insurance in the whole state will go up because of it. Every time there's a storm, insurance steadily creeps up. And insurance in Florida is already pretty high. If you missed this video about my insurance doubling on my house, make sure you check that out. But these kind of increases are really common. My insurance broker actually told me that all of his clients that are having renewals, the average is 50 to 80% increases right now. And part of this is a bigger battle with the state and this kind of constant battle between adjusters and insurance companies and customers. So unfortunately, the state is having to intervene pretty intensely to get more companies down here to make a more competitive insurance market. But I also know from growing up in Tornado Alley in Oklahoma that if your house is in an area where it's likely to have inclement weather like tornadoes, hurricanes, hail, then your insurance is just likely going to be high, and insurance is just high down here. All right, con number 4, another thing that is expensive down here is rent, and this is steadily going up. It might be softening just a little bit, but even before the pandemic, there was a 5-year stretch where St. Petersburg, Florida had the highest rent increases of any market in the US. So these rent increases are pretty high, and this area is very attractive to real estate investors because of that. The home price to rent ratio is still pretty favorable for investors. Con number 5, although employers down here are hiring quite a bit, they don't pay really high. So if you're coming from another bigger market, if you're coming from California, if you're coming from Colorado, if you're coming from Texas, New York, it's gonna feel like a pay decrease if you're doing a lateral move down here. And I've even had clients who were promoted within their employer, but had to take a pay cut by taking the move down here. Employers are hiring a lot, and Tampa likes to brag about how many job openings there are, but you might have to take a pay cut. Real quick, the 5 pros of moving to the Tampa, Florida area. Number 1, the cost of living is still cheaper than the national average. And so, I mean, the cost of living in the world right now is high. I understand that. I'm not trying to be like tone deaf on that, but Tampa is still a little bit cheaper than the national average, between 8 and 12% cheaper. Number 2 pro of moving to the Tampa area right now is it is kind of paradise. I mean, this is like a place where people come take vacations. Like, why wouldn't you want to live somewhere where you go on vacation? And that's not for everybody. I get it. And this isn't even an ideal vacation for all of you. So I understand all that. But if you've ever just been on a vacation here that's like really kind of checked all the boxes, you did Disney, you did the beaches, you did all these things, and you just thought, oh my gosh, I'd just love to live here. That's it. That feeling, that's what you can have here. Okay, the 3rd pro, going back to the first con, actually, there's a lot of people always coming. So there's a constant influx of new people and ideas all the time, and that's actually really amazing. The turnover of these areas is really cool. Everybody is from somewhere else, and the locals hate that I say that, but there's just chunks of people from Ohio and Michigan and other places in the Midwest, and New York and New York and New York. But it's kind of cool. Okay, pro number 4, Florida is big. It's not full. It's not bursting at the seams. There's a lot more space. It's a really big state. And yeah, it's long, but even just driving all the way across it takes hours. A lot more potential here. There's a lot more that Florida can grow in terms of population, in terms of industries, and all those kind of things. Pro number 5 is the weather. I didn't want to put this too early because it's kind of obvious, but it is kind of the number 1 pro of moving to Florida here as we're going into the most mild season of all of the seasons in Florida. Seasons, they're not really seasons. It's like hot and then less hot. But this less hot season, when my father-in-law starts to bundle up a little bit, when it gets like a little bit below 70, it's so delightful. Today, it was a high of 69 and just a beautiful day. And it's early October right now. So these are very mild winters, and that's a big draw for a lot of people to move to Florida. Tampa is kind of in this sweet spot. You know, if you go a little further north, it gets a little bit colder. If you go a little further south, it gets a little bit hotter in the summer. So this kind of sweet spot of where you get a little bit of a cool off, but I'm still wearing shorts through December most of the year. If you found this video informative or valuable, I think you'll really appreciate this video, just kind of talking about affordability right now. With interest rates being really high right now, affordability is kind of tricky, and I kind of find myself in that position right now where I'd like to sell my house, but don't want to buy at a higher rate. Thanks for coming by.